Hi everybody, welcome back to Food Smarts. This is our last session actually of the 5. And we're going to work on one more recipe today. I'm actually going to do the recipe first today. And then we're going to spend a good amount of the rest of the time talking about food labels. Okay, as I know a lot of you have had a lot of questions about that, about how to read a label and how to make it work for you. In our book here, we are going to be working on starting with page 56, okay, when we get back to this. But I'm going to start with our recipe first. And today we're going to be making Cuban black beans. All right, oops, that's my water, so I stay hydrated here. Uh-oh. I'm just going to drop everything everywhere, I think. All right, we'll deal with that later. All right, I have already washed my hands, but you know what? I think I'm going to wash them one more time. I'm going to step off camera really briefly just to be super safe. And we're going to be starting with a skillet. Oh my goodness, there is no paper towels here. Oh. Are there? Okay, well that's all right. I'm going to shake my hands off. Okay. All right. So we're going to start with the skillet. And instead of rice, black beans and rice, we're actually going to be using a different kind of grain. We're going to use quinoa. Just in case, you know, none of you have ever had a chance. We've done a couple of things with brown rice. And I wanted to sort of introduce you to another type of whole grain, quinoa. So we'll talk about that in just a second. But what I'm going to do here is I have my skillet. I'm starting with some oil. I'm using olive oil, but you could use any kind of oil that you want. Vegetable oil, corn oil, whatever you have is totally fine. And I'm going to start with a mix of diced onions and red bell pepper, and then I've got a little tiny bit of garlic in here as well. And this really heats my pan up pretty quickly. So if I didn't mention it before, I'm using an induction burner, which runs off of electromagnetic energy. So it's actually magnets in the stovetop and in the pan that make it work and generate heat. And this is a brand new cooktop for me, and I am really enjoying it. Okay, so we're going to take the mix of onions, garlic, and red bell peppers. You could use green bell pepper, red, or orange, yellow, whatever you have is fine. And I'm going to start just tossing this around. And I want to make sure that my vegetables get coated with oil. Because, and I think I mentioned it in a previous class, but oil heats up to a much higher temperature than water does. Water evaporates at about 212 degrees. Oil can get up to 400, even 500 degrees. And what that means is it helps cook the vegetable better. The other thing that it does is oil as a fat is really good at absorbing other flavors. So as the onions and the peppers and the garlic are letting go of their flavors, they get into the oil and they flavor the oil up, which gives the whole dish better flavor than if you hadn't done this with oil. Okay? Hello, come on in. We're starting our recipe first today. All right, and you can see, you can probably smell this. Does it smell good? What I'm going to do with this, I don't want these to brown. So I'm going to drop the heat for a second, just for a little bit, and I'm going to cover this up with a lid, and I'm going to do something called sweating. okay? Not me personally, but the vegetables. What's happening here is you can see all of the water condensing in the top here. It can't get out. And so what it's doing is it's kind of coming back down and dripping back into the vegetables, continuing to soften them. And it's also helping to prevent the oils from the peppers and the onions and the garlic and things like that from escaping, so it keeps it more flavorful, right? The majority of what we taste with onions and peppers is through what we smell, okay? So, and I'm also trying not to brown them. So that's why I'm on a lower heat, right? I don't want these to brown up, all right? Before I continue with this, is there anybody in here who does not like cilantro? Everybody okay with cilantro? Okay, I always ask because cilantro is kind of one of those polarizing herbs. Or some people that just, for some people it tastes like soap. And I don't want to ruin the dish by putting cilantro in for somebody who's going to taste soap when they make this. Okay, so it's been had a couple, about a minute or so, and you can see that the vegetables are becoming more soft, and they're looking really good. Okay, so I'm going to let that go for another. Actually, you know what I think I'm going to do? I'm going to go ahead and add, I have some black beans. Cubans, when we say Cuban black beans, Cuban beans generally mean black beans, but you could use any kind of bean you want for this. You could use pinto beans, you could use kidney beans, you could use garbanzo beans, whatever you want, okay? Because beans don't really taste like a whole lot. I think we've talked about this a little bit, that they're going to take on the flavor of whatever you put with it. Since these are canned, I just need them to warm up. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put them in here and I'm going to stir them around and start letting them get some of the flavor of the peppers and the onions and garlic in them. Okay, and then we're just going to let that go for a minute. So I told you all that I am actually, let me move this under the camera here. I'm actually going to be doing, oops, I'm going to turn that around so they can see it in the camera and you guys can see it here. We're going to use a grain called quinoa instead of brown rice, okay? Who's tried quinoa before? Okay, just one person. All right. So quinoa is actually, so it starts with a Q, Q-U-I-N-O-A, and it's just pronounced quinoa. I'll pass this top around. I bought these pre-cooked ones just in the interest of time. But I want you to try this. Quinoa is actually a seed. It's not really a grain at all, it's a seed. And because it's a seed, it has considerably more protein in it than a typical grain. So I've heated these up. And I'm going to just put some on the plate. So I want you guys to try it. It's very rice-like. The flavor's a little bit different, but as with all grains, there's nothing that has a super pronounced flavor to it, right? All grains are generally typically pretty bland for the most part. Okay. And then I'll get this other one. I'm going to make a plate for Sean because he is working behind the camera and doing a stellar job. As usual. All right. But give this a taste and see what you think. This is something that you can buy as a dry grain, just as you would with rice or any other grain that you might get. It's kind of fluffy. But as I said, it has a super high protein content, much more so than you would find in rice or another grain. And for those of you who are actually here in the studio, I'm going to dry this off. And I'm just going to pass this label around so you can take a look at it. Okay? Obviously, it's a little bit more expensive if it's pre-prepared, but you can buy it dry and just boil it, just as you would rice, or steam it. A lot of people will steam it. The thing about quinoa, though, is that in its raw state, you have to wash it, okay? Quinoa has this bitter compound on it. They're called saponins. They're just naturally occurring, but they're super bitter. So if you take dry quinoa and you just put it in water and you boil it, it's going to taste super bitter. So what you need to do with it is you need to put it in like a sieve or a bowl or something. Put it in there. Get the water in there, swish it around, drain the water off. I would do that a couple of times, and if you do that, it gets rid of all the bitter stuff, and then you can cook it up and it'll be just fine. Okay? All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn our heat up, and I'm going to kind of evaporate some of this liquid here. And then I'm going to add some flavoring to it. I used cumin when we did I was going to say quinceañera. Quesadilla. I don't know why quinceañera was in my head. Anyway, when we did the quesadillas, I used some cumin. I'm going to use it again here just because cumin is a very common spice to include in Cuban cooking. I'm going to put a tiny bit of salt in here, just enough to kind of pull the flavor up a little bit. We don't really need too much. These black beans that I used are low sodium, and I have rinsed them off, so they weren't contributing a whole lot of sodium to this on their own. Okay. And then since nobody said that they were going to be offended by cilantro, I'm going to put some fresh cilantro in here to finish it off. So I have a fresh bunch of cilantro here that's been washed, and I've just kind of bunched it up in kind of usually what I do with fresh herbs is I bunch them up in my hand and I just kind of cut crosswise. Mm-hmm. Yeah, for cilantro, for any kind of parsley that's a soft, it has like a soft vegetable sort of stem, like parsley and cilantro, that's fine. For herbs that have woody stems, like thyme and rosemary and stuff like that, you wouldn't use those for eating. You might use them for flavor, but you don't want them for eating necessarily, unless you want to be stabbed in the gums. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut the heat on this, and I'm going to add in our fresh cilantro, and I'm just going to stir it around. Okay, how long did this take me to do that? Not that long. Not that long. And if you're in your house and you're cooking these, if you've pre-cooked your grains, if you've pre-cooked your rice or your cilantro or your quinoa or whatever it is that you're using, it's not going to take that long to throw this together. Literally what I did in this skillet was I just sauteed an onion, pepper, threw in a can of rinsed black beans, a little bit of cumin, tiny bit of salt, and some cilantro. And that's it. That's what I did, right? This is a very quick dinner. Is it a healthy dinner? Yeah, because we talked about nutrient density. It's something we've been talking about, right? We've got onions in here. We've got peppers in here. Peppers are super high in vitamins A and C. They're very high fiber. Beans are super high in fiber and full of B vitamins, right? Cilantro has a lot of sort of phytochemicals in it that are super healthy. A lot of those are antioxidants, and there's a lot of nutrition research that continues to go on with this, so you can see what's in there. And I'm going to pass these out. I actually didn't try this. I'm going to try it real quick. I'm sure it'll be fabulous because I make this all the time myself. That's awesome. Okay. Okay.
What if you're trying to stay away from salt when you cook?
If you're trying to stay away from salt,
Yeah.
this really does not have much salt in it. We're going to talk about salt today because we're going to talk about the food label and we're going to actually talk a lot about salt. Yeah. Oh, Sean, you know what? I owe you a plate. Okay.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
All right, give it a try and see what you think. You have the okay, you don't have the camera on my backside. Just checking. Try the quinoa and see what you think of that. You're probably going to find it's not all that different than rice. It's just a different shape. And the flavor might be a tiny bit different. But it is actually, pretty, if you're familiar with rice, you're going to be pretty familiar with this. Okay. What do you guys think? Oh, plain? Okay, so you feel like maybe it needs a little more rice or a little more salt on it, or?
Some type of seasoning.
Hmm?
Some type of seasoning.
See, okay, so maybe not enough cumin. So you could easily put salsa on that. Absolutely. Okay, did I give you one of these already? I did. Okay, so that one's yours. There you go. Okay. Okay, so some of you were finding this a little bit bland. You could add more seasoning to it. If you wanted to put more cumin in there, if you wanted to put some chili peppers, some hot sauce, some salsa, any of those things into it. Those things aren't necessarily adding any salt, right? If you're going to use things like salsa and or hot sauce, you're going to want to check the label. We'll talk about that because sometimes those sauces have salt in them, so you have to be careful. You just have to be careful what you're looking for with that. Okay. I'm keeping myself hydrated here. Is everybody going to start drinking water if you're not already? I see a few people with water bottles in here. I think I mentioned it really early in the class, but if you're over 60, you tend to dehydrate more quickly than younger people do, okay, just for a variety of reasons. And the weather is going to start getting warmer this week. It looks like we're going to be in the 80s next week. So carrying a water bottle is one of the best ways to remember to drink your water, right? I think I mentioned it early in the class, but when you're older, your body isn't as good at telling you you're thirsty as it is when you're younger. And so it's easy to kind of forget to drink, okay? So carrying this with you can really help a lot. Well, I'm gonna put this down here so you guys don't have to look at it. But I personally carry a water bottle around, otherwise I would forget to drink. So, okay, so let's get back to the book here. Yeah, we have a question. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, okay, yeah, so in studio what they're talking about is we have two ladies in here, a lady and a gentleman in here, that have these I think they're made out of aluminum, right? They're aluminum water bottles, and I think you can buy, I've seen those at Rayleigh's and probably some other stores, and you can just buy them and refill them, right? So it's not creating plastic waste, so that's a good thing. And anything that you have to do, I think just the act of carrying a bottle with water in it, you see it and you just remember, oh, I have to drink, right? If you don't have it with you, you may not remember, until it's too late. So yeah, so definitely carry a water bottle. If you don't already carry a water bottle, I strongly encourage you to consider adopting that habit. So, okay. In our booklet, Food Smarts, we're going to be on page 56, and we're going to start talking about food labels, as I said. Okay. So, and those of you at home, you know, if you feel like you want to chime in with answers, please feel free to do so. You can just temporarily unmute yourself, or not. It's whatever your comfort level is. That's totally fine. But I wanted to ask, how many of you look at food labels when you're in the grocery store? Okay. So, yeah, a good number of people in here in the studio are indicating they look at food labels. So when you look at food labels, what are you looking for? Sugar? Sugar, salt. Okay. Do you know what you're looking at when you look at sugar and salt on the label? How much is in there? Okay. Do you understand how much is too little or too much? No. Yeah. That's why we're talking about this today. Because it's, you know, I've been a registered dietitian for almost 30 years. I've been doing this a really long time. And I find that people understand that it's good to look at the food label, but they don't necessarily understand what they're looking at or how to put that in context. And so we're going to talk about that today, so that when you look at a food label, you're going to understand, oh, okay, well, I see how much salt is in there, and now I know what that means. Okay, so that's what we're going to zero in on today. Okay. So let's see here. First, what I want to do is I'm going to have you look at we're going to start on page 57. And you'll see that there's a picture of a food label on here, just a generic food label. Now, one thing that I want to point out is that if you look at the bottom underneath that label, you'll see in parentheses it says adapted from pre-2015 USDA labels style. Okay? Now, what that means is that in 2016, the USDA developed a new label. So this is an older label type, okay? But we're going to use it for this part of the lesson. If you look on page, let's see here, 63, you're going to see two food labels here. The one that's on the inner part of the page is the newest label type. So we're going to talk about this in just a minute, but I just want you to understand that, you know, here on page 57, I'm going to use this to talk about the different nutrients on the label, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to use the label in just a second. But I just want you to understand what you're looking at when you look on here, okay? All right. So at the top you see start here, and that has the servings per container and how big a serving size is, okay? One of the things that food labels used to do is they would put the serving size that was sort of the recommended serving size, but it wasn't necessarily the size that people actually ate, right? So if you looked on a box of Cheerios, it might say a serving size is 1/2 cup. Okay, you guys know how much a half a cup is? Remember we talked about our cup tan? Okay, is there anybody who eats that much Cheerios at a time? No, I don't. Half a cup, that's nothing. Why am I bothering with Cheerios then? So what they decided was, okay, let's go back and rewrite these portion sizes for the amount that people are actually going to eat, because then it's going to be more valuable to you. So you look on there, you see, okay, it's a cup of Cheerios now. Now that's a little more reasonable, and I can have a better idea, you know, of what all is in that. Okay. The other part of this is that, so if we look on this food mock-up label, it says there's 2 servings per container at the top, and then it says the serving size is 1 cup. Okay, so how many cups are in the container? Oh, I'm sorry, I'm on page 57. Oh, we went back to page 57. We'll get to that other one in just a second. It's got the label with the colors on it. Okay, so we're looking up here at the top at the serving size per container. So there's 2 cups in the entire container, right? Everything on this food label pertains to the serving size. So 1 cup of this product has this amount of stuff in it. If you eat the entire container and you're eating 2 cups, right? So you're eating twice as many servings. You multiply everything by 2, right? Okay. So if you look down at like calories, it says 250. If you eat the whole container, how many calories are you getting? 500, right? Okay. So step 2, check calories. So you're going to look at the calorie amounts, okay, to see what's in there. And then number 3, we start listing. So what it says is limit these nutrients. I'm gonna talk about that in just a second, but I'm gonna kind of give you a little refresher because we've been talking about some of these nutrients regularly as we've gone through the class here. The first ones that you see are fats, 3 different types of fats, right? Total fat. Now, do you remember we were talking about there are fats that are good for your heart and fats that are not so good for your heart, right? Do you remember which one is bad for your heart?
Trans fats.
Trans fats are bad, but what about hard versus liquid? Which one's better for your heart?
Hard. No, liquid better.
Liquid, yeah, liquid fats are better, right? Okay, so if you see the line that says total fat, and then the line under it says saturated fat. Okay, saturated means hard. So that's any kind of hard fat, any kind of fat that's hard at room temperature. So if you look at animal fats, like fat that you see on beef or pork or things like that, bacon, those are all solid at room temperature. Butter is solid. It gets a little soft, but it's still solid at room temperature. And things like Crisco are solid at room temperature. So do I have a question back here?
Yeah. You just talked about total fat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what did you say about total fat?
I haven't said anything about it yet.
Okay.
So I'm going to come back to it. But I wanted to point out under fat, you've got 2 other kinds of fat, saturated and trans fat. Okay? Anytime you see saturated, that's the bad one for your heart. Okay? It doesn't mean don't eat it. Like I said, there's really when you're trying to have a healthy diet, there's really no food that's considered to be off limits. It's just how often you eat it. If you really enjoy bacon, unless there's a compelling reason you have to avoid it, if you have a doctor or a dietitian telling you that, that's one thing. But if you're generally healthy and you're just trying to prevent your heart from getting blocked up, it's okay to have bacon occasionally, like once a week. You want to have bacon, it's Sunday, you want to have a big breakfast, that's totally fine. Remember the 80-20 rule. 80% of the time, your diet is pretty healthy and you have lots of fruits and vegetables and beans and whole grains and things like that. The other 20% of your diet, you can let your hair down a little bit, okay? For most people, again, unless you have a compelling reason from your doctor to not do that. All right. The other kind of fat undersaturated is trans fat. Who's heard of trans fat before? Okay, doesn't sound like anybody's heard of trans fat. Trans fat is a type of saturated fat that is particularly bad for your heart. Okay? Trans fat, I'm not going to go way into it, but the reason it's called trans fat is the way that the molecule is oriented in space. I'd have to go way into organic chemistry to explain that, and I'm not going to do that. All you need to know is that trans fat is super bad for your heart. Now, trans fat, where does it come from? Some trans fat is naturally occurring. So you're going to find maybe a little bit of trans fat in butter or animal fats or things like that. But where the majority of it comes from is when fats are hydrogenated. Have you ever looked at a food label and you've seen the phrase partially hydrogenated fats? Where you see it most of the time is bakery and pastry goods. Okay? So things like cookies and crackers and things like that, because they're very frequently made with hydrogenated fats. Okay? So how do we get hydrogenated fats? the way that they do that is they take vegetable oil, liquid oil. You know, we already talked about how liquid oils are really good for your, you know, they're better for your heart than the hard stuff. Well, what happens is there's a chemical process where hydrogen is shot into the oil, and they add some other stuff, some catalysts to make this whole thing happen, this whole, process happen. And what happens is it turns the liquid fat into hard fat. So it becomes saturated. So you're taking this oil that was primarily unsaturated because it was liquid at room temperature, and you're turning it hard. Okay? And remember what I said about hard fat. If it's hard out here, it's going to be hard in here. Okay? So it doesn't matter that liquid fat, that plant fat was healthy for you. As soon as they hydrogenated it, they made it a lot less healthy for you. Okay? Why do you guys think that food companies use hydrogenated fat to make cookies and stuff? Longer shelf life, definitely. What else? What do you think is the big reason they do it? Money. Money. Money, money, money. If you go and buy cookies in the grocery store, next time you're in the grocery store, pick up a package of cookies or a package of donuts or something like that, and look, and you will find the words hydrogenated fat in some fashion. Hydrogenated fat is way cheaper than butter. Okay? Much, much cheaper. It's like a fraction of the cost of butter. But it does the same thing. It's hard. If anybody in here has ever baked pastries, if you've ever made cookies or cakes or things like that, and you many times need some kind of a solid fat to do that, right? And you need that to make the product. You need it to make bakery products, right? And so a company, of course, wants to maximize profits. And so like, well, we could use butter, but that's going to cost 4 times more than if we use this hydrogenated stuff. It's going to do the same thing, right? And it doesn't taste a whole lot like butter, but that's okay because we can put other flavorings in there, or we can add more sugar or salt to make it taste better. But it's not good for your heart. Yeah. Lard. So lard, did lard come from an animal? Yeah, it did come. So it came from a pig, right? So it's animal fat, and it's hard at room temperature, right? So because it's saturated, it's not the best for your heart. And because hydrogenated fat has become saturated, has become hard, it's not good for your heart either. Okay? So let's take that one step further. When you eat saturated fat, we talked about how it can accelerate heart disease, but we didn't talk necessarily about how that happens. One of the ways that it happens is when you eat saturated fats, it raises your blood cholesterol level. Okay, did anybody know that? I see you nodding your head. Yeah. Saturated fat and cholesterol are not the same thing, but they tend to hang out together, especially in food. So what happens with saturated fat is it stimulates your liver to make more cholesterol. Okay, did I talk to you guys about this before? I can't remember. I teach a lot of classes, and sometimes they get tangled up, and I can't remember who I told what to. So your liver makes cholesterol. I think we did talk about this because we talked about vitamin D. Okay. So what happens is you eat saturated fat, and your liver says, hey, let's make cholesterol. And so it pumps all this extra cholesterol into your blood. And some people have livers who are like really, really good at making cholesterol, right? That's genetic. We can't do anything about that. And some people need medications to kind of calm the liver down a little bit so that it doesn't make quite as much cholesterol. But the more cholesterol you have floating around in your blood, the higher risk of some of that settling on the inside of those arteries and around your heart, blood vessels in your brain, right? That can cause stroke if you have, blocked up vessels in there. So the more saturated fat you eat, the worse it is for your heart, in part because it's driving up your blood cholesterol levels, okay? So if you go in the grocery store and you look at a tub of Crisco, one of the things it'll say on it, because Crisco is a plant product, right? It's plant oil. There's no animal products in there at all. If you look on it, it'll have a big label that says no cholesterol, which is true. There's not a drop of cholesterol in it, but it might as well have cholesterol in it because if you eat it, your liver is going to make it. Okay? So go easy. So when you're looking at food labels, you don't want things that have a lot of saturated fat in them. Okay? There's also a line on there, if you look below the fat lines, the total fat, saturated fat, and trans fat, there's a line for cholesterol in there. We'll talk about what that means in just a second. Now, to go back and talk about total fat, when we're talking about total fat here, we're talking about all different types of fat, right? So it's not just the saturated, but we're also talking about the unsaturated, or the polyunsaturated, and the monounsaturated, and the trans fat, and all those different things. Those are all gathered together. Okay, so does that make sense? Okay, we're going to talk about what these percentages mean in just a second. All right. So you see cholesterol there. Recommendation by the American Heart Association is that you don't get more than about 30 milligrams of cholesterol, 300 milligrams of cholesterol per day. All right, so whatever this product is, it has 30 milligrams, so it's about a tenth of what you should be having. Cholesterol you're only going to find in foods that have animal sources. If it didn't come from an animal, it's not going to have cholesterol in it unless that was added in, okay? So something like, oatmeal is never going to have cholesterol in it. Something like Crisco is never going to have cholesterol in it, right? Something like beans are never going to have cholesterol in it unless you're getting the kind that they add lard to, like refried beans with lard, right? That's going to have cholesterol. If it didn't come from an animal, it has no cholesterol in it. All right, but just for a rule, just so you know, about 300 is the recommendation, no more than that per day, most days of the week, right? Eggs are going to have more cholesterol in them, but if you enjoy eating eggs once or twice a week, that's fine. It's just most of the time you want to be under 300, okay? All right, sodium. Let's talk about sodium a little bit. So, regardless of whether or not you have a chronic disease that maybe you're trying to manage, like high blood pressure, or maybe you have edema, you have lots of swelling or things like that, maybe you have kidney disease, those sorts of things. These are all reasons that you're going to want to watch out for sodium. But even people who are perfectly healthy and don't have any disease processes going on, more and more research shows us that it's good for everybody to watch out for their sodium. It doesn't matter who you are, and it doesn't matter what age you are. We should all be watching out, right? So has anybody heard how much sodium per day is suggested?
I think you told us 300.
Well, that was cholesterol. Cholesterol is 300. So for sodium, the amount per day that nobody should go over is about 2,300 milligrams per day. 2,300 milligrams per day. Does anybody have any idea how much that is? If I were to measure out 2,300 milligrams of sodium, does anybody know how much that might be? 1 teaspoon. Yeah, 1 teaspoon of added salt. It's not a whole lot, all right? So 2,300 milligrams is and that's for everybody. It doesn't matter who you are. If you're somebody who's watching out for high blood pressure, or you have like swelling, edema, things like that, kidney disease, heart disease, those sorts of things, you're going to want to go less. I think the recommendation on that is actually about 1,200 the last time I was looking, but 2,300 for everybody, okay? So the rule of thumb that I tell people to just be aware of when you're looking at that sodium line, try to avoid anything that has more than about 300 milligrams of sodium per serving, okay? This particular product in our book here, it says 470. Could you make that fit? You could. Remember, you're playing with about 2,300-ish milligrams if you're, normally healthy person. But what I would say is that, and I've talked a lot during this class about how most of us kind of eat the same things every day, right? We go into the store and we buy the same products. I buy that, turkey for my sandwich. I buy that soup. I buy this and I buy that. Okay. What I want you guys to do when you go home today is look in your cabinets and look in your refrigerator and pull your products out and take a look at the sodium line and just say, oh, how much sodium is in that? Okay, these black beans right here are low sodium. This is about 130 milligrams per serving, right?
You rinse it off though, right?
Hmm?
You rinse it off.
I rinsed it off, so it's actually going to be lower than that. Yeah. So, when you rinse black beans, you can lose up to like 75% of the sodium in there. So these are pretty crazy low. Might be why they tasted a little bland. So you put cumin on it. We'll put more cumin, and that will.
Because usually when you make chili, just throw the whole thing in there.
You can do that, yeah. But with foods that you're making, habit plays a big role in that. So if you make chili and you're used to throwing the can in, if you were to stop and rinse that can off before you put in there and made that a habit, anytime I use canned beans, I'm just going to rinse them from now on. That can be a real simple habit that will reduce your sodium, right? Or you could buy the low sodium stuff. I mean, even if I didn't rinse these, they're still pretty low sodium, 130 milligrams. So if you want to dump the whole can and maybe get the low sodium beans and do that. Yeah, so just a thought. What I want you to do is go and look at what you have in your house and see where the sodium is. One of the things that's most eye-opening, I think, to most people is soup. Soups are crazy high in sodium. I was looking at a can of Progresso the other day, and it was over 1,000 milligrams of sodium in there. And so if we're talking about 2,300 a day, that's almost half of your sodium for one day in that one can. The last time I was teaching this class, I was actually teaching at a food bank up in Auburn, and somebody had donated a can of soup. I think it was called like Eeny Beanie or Weenie Beanie or something like that. And it was like beans and like chopped up hot dogs. And it was like, it was sitting there, and I picked it up and it had like 1,800 milligrams of sodium per serving. And I was like, oh my gosh. And I was showing it and everybody was like, oh no, that's terrible. Soup is kind of notorious, right, for doing that. So if you're somebody who eats soup regularly, it might not be a bad idea to think about making your own, because if you make your own, there's going to generally be a lot less sodium. You have more control over the amount of salt that's in there. But the other thing about soup is that it freezes really well, right? So if you eat, chicken noodle soup and you like the, Campbell's chicken noodle soup or whatever, but the sodium is crazy, consider making your own and just freeze it and then pull it out as you would a can, right? It's also a lot cheaper, which is good. So, but that's a little eye-opening for some folks to kind of take a look and say, oh my gosh, how much sodium is in there? And that is now something that when you go into the grocery store and you're looking at that sodium line, it's going to give you some context. But I'm going to teach you another way to use that using these percentages in just a second. Okay. And then 4, we've got, it just says get enough of these nutrients. So things like vitamin D, calcium, iron, potassium, so those are nutrients that are on there that you can take a look at. Let's go back up and look at the carbohydrate line. All right, what is a carbohydrate? Anybody know what that is? Starch. Okay, so carbohydrates, yeah, starches are carbohydrates. What else? What is a carbohydrate? Anybody? I mean, so we know that what kind of foods are carbohydrates, but does anybody know what it is? Yeah, that's exactly what it's sugar. That's absolutely what it is, right? And now you're thinking, wait a minute, I've heard carbohydrates are good for me, but sugar's bad for me. What's up with that? All right, let's talk about that. All right. Carbohydrates are a type of sugar. right? There's a lot of different types of sugar. We're going to talk about this when we talk about the ingredient label. All sugar does is provide energy. It's like putting gasoline into the tank of your car. If you don't have any gas in your car, or electricity, I guess, if you're driving an electric vehicle, if you don't have anything like that, how far is your car going to go? It's not. I mean, your car can't go without fuel. Carbohydrate is like that for your body. Your body prefers to run on carbohydrates, so it's kind of like putting gas in your car. So you need to have the right kinds of carbohydrate in your body to make it work well. If you try to put diesel gasoline into your Toyota, what's going to happen? It's not going to work very well, okay? If you put the wrong kind of carbohydrates in your body, it'll go, but it's not going to go very well, okay? And it's probably going to cause a lot of problems, right? So I just use that car analogy to kind of help you guys relate a little bit more to what this is. So there's a lot of different types of carbohydrate, right? There are types called simple carbohydrates, and those that are called complex carbohydrates. Have you guys ever heard those terms before? You might have heard them here and there. Okay. So in short, simple carbohydrates are the ones that are not good for you. Simple carbohydrates are the types of, they're smaller sugars, which just means that they're like maybe two little carbohydrate molecules stuck together. Okay, again, don't want to get into organic chemistry with this, but to your body, the foods that have simple carbohydrates in them are things like candy and table sugar. Okay, so things that are just sweet. When we think of things that are, cookies and cake and things that have like table sugar in them, right? Those are simple carbohydrates. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with having those sometimes. It's like saturated fat. You can have, simple sugars some of the time, 20% of the time, right? In that little 20% of your diet. But they're not going to be things that you want to eat regularly. One of the interesting things about this, and you're going to see this on the new label, is that there's now a distinction about added sugars in the diet. And the reason that that's there is there's more and more research that's showing us that having too many simple sugars in your diet is linked to an increased risk of heart disease, right? We'll talk about that more in just a second. But I just want you to understand when I say simple sugars, that's what I'm talking about. Just sweets, what we traditionally think of as sweets. That generally means simple sugars or simple carbohydrates, okay? Complex carbohydrates are what we typically find in starches that aren't sweet, right? So when we think of things like bread or whole grains, that quinoa that you just ate, the rice, potatoes, cereals, those sorts of things. Those are complex carbohydrates. And what's meant by those is that it takes the body a little longer to kind of break those down, right? The body breaks these carbohydrates down into the simplest unit, which is called glucose, right? And glucose is like premium unleaded for your body. Okay, that's what your body prefers to run on. That's what it runs most efficiently on. And so when you're eating carbohydrate, starchy foods that don't have a lot of, or any added sugars into them, you run better. Okay, let's talk about something like fruit. Okay, is fruit healthy? Yeah, fruit is healthy, right? But when we talk about eating more fruits or vegetables, we generally recommend to eat more vegetables. Have fruit because it's good for you, but fruit also has simple sugar in it. But even though it has simple sugar in it, it also has a lot of really other good stuff in it that kind of vouches for the fruit, right? There's fiber, there's vitamins, there's minerals, there's phytochemicals, there's all kinds of stuff. So definitely go ahead and eat fruit. Because there's, you're worse off eating like a handful of Skittles than you are an apple, right? Because at least the apple's giving you something in addition to the simple carbohydrates. Yeah. Oh, the best fruit that I suggest, any kind of fruit. Any kind of fruit. Any kind of fruit that doesn't have added sugar on it, right? So if you're going to buy canned fruit, don't buy anything that's in syrup. The word syrup just means simple sugar, okay? So if you're going to buy canned fruit, buy it packed in its own juice, right? There's a lot of fruit snacks out there that usually are things more that kids eat. You can get like, fruit roll-ups and things. The first time my mother watched my son, he came home with this fruit by the foot thing that I never bought. I was like, what? And he thought it was great. He was like, look what Grandma gave me. And I was like, oh my gosh. I had to have a little talk with Grandma. But then we decided that he liked it and he could have it every once in a while, so that was fine. But, if you look at the food label on that, you're going to see there's tons of added sugar in it. So, yeah.
So, if you have 5 fruits,
Mhm.
5 fruits, I was told they have 5 if you eat them raw.
Mhm.
And then I took the same 5 fruit and put it in the thing for a smoothie.
Yeah.
The sugar level is higher in the smoothie versus eating them raw.
Yeah, actually it's the same, but can you drink 5 pieces of fruit more efficiently than you can eat 5 pieces of fruit? Yeah. Because it doesn't take that much. That's why smoothies, you have to watch out for them, right? Yeah, smoothies are healthy, but you could easily drink 5 pieces of fruit and you get all this sugar in it, right? Because if you go somewhere like Jamba Juice, how big is the juice? Got my juice, it's healthy, I'm better off than I'm drinking, sodas. Well, yeah, you're getting some vitamins and minerals, but you're also getting a huge amount of sugar, okay?
No,
So,
I'm talking about the same fruit goes into Jamba Juice and you're just grinding it and it becomes liquid.
yeah. So what you're talking about there is, let's just say I gave you 5 apples, okay? And I said, I want you to eat these 5 apples, all right? And then I gave you a juice that I had blended up and it's got 5 apples in it. Which one do you think you're going to finish first?
Juice.
Yeah. Because it's a lot easier when something is blended up to drink it down. You don't have to chew it, you don't have to do anything to it. So the question for those of you who are online is she's asking about, is it the same, I heard that there's the same, what did you say?
The amount of sugar content.
The sugar content was same amount of sugar content in 5 pieces of fruit that are blended together versus 5 individual pieces of fruit. And so we're talking about the difference there. So the difference there is that if you sat down and ate 5 apples, first of all, would you eat 5 apples in a row, or do you feel like you would feel full before you finish that?
Yeah, I'd be full.
I mean, me personally, I might be able to get through 2 apples, but then I'm done. I don't want any more apples, right? But if you blend 5 apples up, I don't have to chew it. I just have to open my mouth and I just have to swallow. So it's going to be a lot easier. So even though 5 apples and 5 blended apples have the same amount of calories, same amount of sugar, same amount of everything, I am more likely, I'm going to drink more than I'm going to eat. So does that make sense?
The amount is just more concerned with the sugar level, the same sugar level.
Same sugar level.
Someone said because you're.
It doesn't matter what you're doing to it. It's the same sugar level. It's just how easy did you make it to consume, right? I'm glad you brought that up because a lot of people will say, I drink a smoothie every day. And that's not necessarily a bad thing, but you have to be careful. When you're drinking a smoothie, you should be drinking a smoothie, not a smoothie, okay? We're talking about, maybe 8 ounces for a smoothie. Because even though, like I said, you're still getting fiber and vitamins and minerals and things like that from that fruit, you're also getting a huge amount of simple carbohydrates. And you're much better eating the majority of your fruits and vegetables as vegetables, because vegetables are generally not giving you as much simple sugar. Okay, does that make sense? Yeah. Did I tank your smoothie plans? You're like, I love my smoothies. Yeah, smoothies can be a really good way to get nutrition in. You just have to be careful with how much. Some people will add vegetables to their smoothies, And there are certain vegetables that are more popular than others. I mean, if you've heard of like green smoothies, you kind of see that kind of around, or if you go to Jamba Juice. And that's what they'll do. They'll put like spinach or celery or carrots or something in there. And you can try it. And if you want to go, you could go online and look up, fruit and veggie smoothies and see what you come up with. So if you like smoothies, what I would suggest is have a smaller amount if you're using just fruit, but also look at vegetables and what might work for you. Okay, I mean the thing that's nice about smoothies versus juicing is that when you juice something, you're getting rid of all the fiber, a lot of the fiber, and you want the fiber. Now, when you're having a smoothie, you're drinking it because it's just being blended down. You're drinking it, so I think that's a better way to go than juicing. Yeah, be careful with how much fruit you're having at one time, especially if you have diabetes or you need to watch out for sugar, things like that. Liquid sugar is generally not the best thing for diabetes anyway, because it tends to, essentially when you're blending fruit up, you're breaking it down. You're already doing some of the work that your stomach and your GI tract does. And what that means is that sugar can get into your blood faster. And that's not necessarily what you want when you have diabetes. Okay, it's like hitting your gut with a sugar bomb, and all of a sudden your sugar goes way up. So yeah, okay. Let's see. Okay, so simple carbohydrates and complex carbohydrates are all going to be wrapped up in this total carbohydrate line. Okay, you don't necessarily know what is from what in this food label, but we'll see in the new one they made some distinctions, and we'll talk about that in a second. You'll see a line for dietary fiber. Now, fiber is a type of carbohydrate, but you can't digest it. Okay? Fiber is one of the ways to tell what sort of food is a carbohydrate is that it's going to end in the suffix OSE, ose. So if you've heard of glucose, sucrose, fructose, lactose, right? That means sugar. You see OSE on the end of something, that means sugar. Okay? We'll talk about that when we talk about ingredient labels a little bit more. Fiber is a type of carbohydrate called cellulose. Now, cellulose is a type of fiber that humans can't digest, but a cow can. That's how a cow can eat grass and get energy from it. If you and I try to eat grass and live off of it, we're going to die because we can't break it down for energy. Cow has an enzyme that can break that down. We don't. So when you eat something that has cellulose in it, without being too graphic, it goes in and it comes out in the same form. All right. Cellulose is it's like plant cell walls. So when you eat something like broccoli, you're eating the plant, the plant fibers. You can't get a lot of calories in it. If I ate broccoli, half a cup of broccoli, I'm going to get about 25 calories from that. If I gave that same broccoli to a cow, that cow is going to get significantly more calories because it can use those cellulose calories. I can't. Okay? So cellulose is kind of the same thing. Have you guys heard the term roughage? Sort of an old-fashioned term. People say, you got to get your roughage in. Cellulose is roughage, which is the same thing as fiber. Okay? One of the things that cellulose plays a lot of really, and I don't want to make it too simple, but there's different types of fibers that go through, but cellulose is the primary one with plants, that when we eat plant foods. It provides a lot of really good, healthy benefits when we eat it, right? Helps make you more regular, right? It may help reduce risk of certain types of colon cancers and things like that. There's evidence that certain types of fibers may help reduce your blood cholesterol level, things like that. So those are good things to have in your diet. But the reason I bring this up is because dietary fiber, and actually I think I'm going to point this out a little bit more when we get to the other food label. because I think it'll make more sense when I actually have numbers behind it. So I'll talk about that in just a second. For right now, I just want you to know that fiber is a type of carbohydrate, but it's another good, healthy type of carbohydrate. Okay? All right. So look over to this side, number 6, right here. This is going to be a quick and dirty way for you to be able to use these percentages. Now, the reason the percentages in this purple column are on here is because, and you see the percentages, what this means is these are reference values for somebody who requires a 2,000 calorie a day diet. Okay? Not everybody requires 2,000 calories a day, but this is just kind of an average, I guess, right? And so what this means, if we look up again at total fat and it says 12 grams of total fat on that top line, and we look across and it says 18%, what that means is that if you happen to need 2,000 calories a day, one serving size of this product, 1 cup of it, is going to give you about 18% of your recommended daily value of fat. That's what it means. Now, most people don't need 2,000 calories a day. We kind of need, some need more, some need less. A better way to use this that works for everybody is to look, when it says here at number 6, it says quick guide to percent DV means daily value. 5% or less is low, 20% or more is high. So let's look at that fat line again. It says 18%. Anything on this label that has 20% or more can be considered a good source of that product. Well, fat is almost there, right? Is that necessarily a good thing? If you're somebody who's trying to watch for excess calories, fat has a lot of calories in it. It has more than twice the amount of calories as carbohydrates or protein. Maybe that's a little high for your comfort, right? Let's find something. Look at sodium. Look at that sodium line, 20%. This means that this product is a really good source of sodium. Are you looking in your diet for something that's a good source of sodium? No. Nobody should be looking for a good source of sodium in their diet. Well, there's a small subset of people who need it, but majority of us, no, we don't want that, right? So that right there, you can look at this and go, oh, wow, 20% sodium, maybe that's not the best thing for me, okay? On the other hand, let's look down at the bottom in these blue lines right here, and you see iron on here, and you look over and that also says 20%, okay? Maybe you're somebody who chronically has low blood iron. You might think, oh, you know what? If I can get a low sodium version of this food, that might be a good source of iron for me. Okay, because that's something that you want. On the other hand, the line above it, calcium, only 2%. So that's less than 5. So this is not a good serving of calcium. So maybe or maybe not you want that. If you're getting your calcium from somewhere else, it may not matter. Okay, so when you go in the grocery store now and you're looking just at those labels, you can look at the percentages and kind of get an idea. Oh, this might be good, this might not be so good. Plus, I've given you a few numbers for context, like sodium and that sort of thing. Okay, now what I want you guys to do is to turn to page 63.
I have a question.
Yeah.
On the oils,
Yeah.
when you're baking,
Mhm.
how do you replacing the oil with like applesauce?
Yeah, so the question was replacing fat in baking with applesauce. So applesauce it doesn't do exactly the same thing as fat would on a recipe. So you might find that the end product might be a little bit different, like it might be a little flatter if you're making cake or just not kind of rising quite as much. But the flavor is okay and the recipe still works. In this case, you're replacing fat, so you're reducing calories. But when you're adding applesauce, you need to check your applesauce and see how much sugar is in it, right? Because, that could be, you could be making it extra sweet, right? Some applesauces, if you go and you look at applesauce, there are some that have a ton of sugar added to it, right? And then others that are more natural. So you have to look at the label and see. Okay, so let's look at page 63. And we're going to look at this inner, the one on the inner part of the page. Okay, it's a little bit longer than the other one, but we're going to focus on this one here. Okay, there's a little bit more information on this label here. When we look at this label, first of all, look at the percentages. This food is not a good source of which nutrients? But based on the percentages. Is it a good source of fat? Remember, anything that's 5% or less, it's not a good source. Okay, so is it a good source of fat? No. What about saturated fat? Is it a good source of saturated fat?
Yes,
Okay, why yes?
because we don't want saturated fat.
Right, but what percentage?
3%.
3%. So it's not a good source if it's 5% or less. Okay? So this would not be a good source of saturated fat. Right?
I thought we wanted to eliminate saturated fat.
Well, I'm just going off percentages. So what I just said on the other page, so when you're looking at these percentages on the side, anything that's 5% or less, that food is not a good source. Okay? So it's good that it's not a good source. I think that's what you're trying to say. Okay. So yeah. So
Or whatever, that's
yeah.
It's not a good source, but
Right.
it's good.
I think that when we say it's not a good source, we think of that as sort of a negative connotation. But in this case, it's good because it's not a good source of saturated fat, and that's a good thing, right? Okay. Is this food a good source of cholesterol? There's no cholesterol in it, right? There's 0 cholesterol. So it's less than 5%. So this is not a good source of cholesterol. That's a good thing. Okay. This food, do you think this food is there a possibility it could have come from an animal? An animal product?
No.
No, it doesn't have any cholesterol in it. So it's not going to, I mean, there aren't many animal source foods that don't have some cholesterol in it. So the odds are this is not an animal product. Okay, is this a good source of sodium? No, it's not. And that's a good thing, right? 5 milligrams. Let's see here. I don't see anything on this that's above 20. But let's actually talk about the number. So does that kind of make sense to you when you're looking at these percentages, right? So with these nutrients that you don't want in your diet, saturated fat, trans fat, sodium, cholesterol, you don't want that food, most of the foods you eat, to be good sources of that. Yeah.
I'm looking at the thing, I'm not trying to find a good source, I'm trying to
I know.
go
So,
the other way.
right, and that's why I think it was a little confusing. I know what you were talking about. So, but I just wanted to give you another way to use those percentages, because you can use them as kind of a red flag. You want anything, less. You can really tell. So now you can look at those percentages and know, oh, okay, this is a really good source of sodium. So I don't want this because I don't want sodium, extra sodium in my diet. Okay. Now, I want you to look under the total carbohydrate line again. And you should see in this product, how many grams of total carbohydrate does it have in it? 24, right? Let's look underneath. Dietary fiber. How many grams of dietary fiber? There's 3 grams in there. Now, if you have diabetes, I'm just going to give you a quick trick here. If you are somebody who monitors the amount of carbohydrates that you get in your diet and you have diabetes, you can actually subtract the amount of fiber from the total carbohydrate load. So if this has 24 grams of carbohydrates in it, actually it only has 21 grams of carbohydrates in it, because there's only 21 grams that are usable, that are digestible by you. So if you have diabetes and you need to watch out for your sugar, you can use the fiber line to figure that out. Okay? I'm not going to go way into that because this isn't a diabetes class, although I do teach a diabetes class, but that's another class. So, all right. Total sugars. All right. So total carbohydrate, we just said, is 24 grams. We see this other line below fiber that says total sugars in it, which is 11 grams. Those are naturally occurring sugars in that food. So some natural foods just have naturally occurring sugars. We just talked about fruit. Milk has it, grains. Well, grains don't actually, they might have some simple sugars in them, but not a whole lot. Look at the line below total sugars. What does that mean? Added sugars. That means that's what the food producer put into it. So for every serving of this food, the food producer added sugar back into that. Okay? Added sugars are something that you want to watch out for in your diet. And that's actually why this is on here, because there's a lot of evidence, as I just said, that shows that added sugars are not part of a healthy diet and may be linked to increased risk of heart disease. If you have diabetes, it's not helpful. A lot of times those added sugars are simple sugars. Okay, so that's like with the applesauce. There's some, added, there's natural sugar in applesauce, but the food producer might have added more sugar to make it taste even sweeter to you. Okay, so how do you get around that? What you want to do is, when you're looking at the label, try to choose foods that have minimal, if any, added sugars. All right, it doesn't mean those foods are off limits. It just means, if you like super sweet applesauce and you want to have it, occasionally, that's okay. Unless you have diabetes, and then I would avoid it altogether. But it's okay. But for the majority of the food you eat, you don't want a good chunk of those sugars to be added sugars. Okay, and in this case they are total sugars 11 grams, 9 grams of added sugars. If you look at the total carbohydrate, 24 grams, almost half of the sugar in this serving was added, and it's probably simple carbohydrate. Okay, so when you go to the grocery store next, look at the labels and just kind of learn a little bit, because this is something that you kind of have to get a feel for to do over and over again until you find products that you will actually eat and you enjoy, that happen to have good amount of fiber in them, and they don't have added sugars and things like that, and they don't have too much salt and all that. And then those are the things that you want to make regular part of your diet. Okay, we haven't talked a whole lot about protein. Do you guys know how much protein you need a day? Anybody ever told you? Okay, I'm going to give you a quickie formula to figure out how many grams of how many grams of protein you need per day. The older you get, you need a little bit more protein than you did when you were younger, because our kidneys aren't quite as good at processing, holding on to protein as they were early on, because kidneys get older and maybe don't work quite as well anymore. So there's a little bit that you need, and it's also important to try to hold on to muscle tissue as much as possible, right? Because that starts falling off after you turn age 30. You start losing muscle tissue, and eating enough protein is important, along with exercising. Okay, so what I want you to do, you can write this down and figure it out at home. Take your weight in pounds, whatever that is. You don't have to tell me what that is. And you're going to divide that by 2.2, and that will give you your weight in kilograms. Okay? And whatever that number is how many grams of protein you need per day. Okay? So if you weigh 150 pounds, and you divide that by 2.2. Did we do this already, Sean? I can't remember. I think we already did this, but I can't remember. Sean, do you have a calculator over there?
Yes.
Okay, so can you divide 150 by 2.2? I can't do that in my head. I can do it divided by 2. It's going to be like 70.
Like 68?
Oh, 68.1. Okay, so if you weigh 150 pounds, you need about 68 grams of protein per day. Does that make sense? So you can just do this with a calculator, a simple calculator at home or on your phone or something like that. So your body weight in pounds, divide it by 2.2, that's how many grams of protein. Now, if your doctor or your dietitian has given you a different number, then you go with what your doctor or dietitian has told you. But for most people over 60, that's sort of a good rough measure of how much you need, okay? And it will tell you how many grams of, in this case, this product only has 2 grams of protein in it, so that's not a real super good source of protein. But that's another thing that you can look for on food labels, okay? We talked a little bit about this, I think, when we talked about portion sizes. We talked about like the meat being the palm of your hand or a deck of cards. It's roughly about 3 to 4 ounces, and an ounce of meat has about 7 grams of protein in it. So if you eat a burger, you know, maybe you're getting like, you know, 20 to 30 grams of protein in that. Okay. All right, we have about 10 minutes left. And I'm going to talk about ingredient labels in that last little bit. If you look, this is really tiny print, so if you don't have reading glasses, it might be kind of hard to see. But I'll tell you what's in here. Did you have a question?
How many grams of protein do eggs have?
1 egg has roughly 7 to 8 grams of protein.
7 to 8?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, single egg. Yeah. Okay. Ingredient labels just list what's in the food. So if you are looking at a loaf of bread, you know you're going to have flour on there, and you're going to have water, and you're probably going to have salt and maybe some sugar and things like that. This particular product for this label has whole grain oats as its first ingredient, enriched flour, whole wheat flour, vegetable oil, things like that. Okay. The way that food labels work is that the first 3 ingredients in that list are the majority of what's in that food, because these are listed by weight, right? So whatever weighs the most is listed first. So this food right here, we talked about the importance of whole grain and having whole grains in your diet. The first ingredient here is whole grain. And the second ingredient is enriched flour. We'll talk about that in a second. And then the third is whole wheat flour. So of these 3, 2 of them are whole grain. So does this seem like a healthy food? Yeah, it does, right? And actually, you're using the magnifier. I gave you guys this little card today. And this is something that actually you can use it to read recipes, and you can use it to read food labels. If you don't have reading glasses, it's a nice thing to just have. I can't see anything in the grocery store without my reading glasses. So, but this is a nice little tool. Those of you at home have hopefully received one. Brittany should have sent these little cards to you with the magnifying panel. If you don't have one of these, go ahead and message to Sean, and we can get one to you. Okay, but hopefully everybody has that. So the second ingredient on here is enriched wheat flour. So anytime you see enriched, that means that it was a food that was processed and then they added the nutrients back to it. So remember we talked about like white flour, how they remove like the bran and the fiber and all kinds of stuff, and then they have like the white flour, but then they spray nutrients back onto it, like B vitamins and stuff like that. That's enriching. Okay, so that's not the best, but we have 2 other whole grain ingredients in here, so that's good. If you look at a food label and the first ingredient is white flour and sugar and hydrogenated fat, that's not a good choice. Okay. So the things that are listed in here, you're going to see partially hydrogenated fat is one that you'll see sometimes. You'll see salt, you'll see sugar, you'll see other forms of sugar. Remember we said anything that is a sugar ends in OSE, so you might see glucose and fructose and things like that. But you also might see sugar in other forms. You might see high fructose corn syrup, right? You might see, high fructose corn syrup, just corn syrup, those sorts of things. Anytime you see the word syrup, it just means sugar. Anytime you see honey means sugar, right? Honey sometimes has sort of that I call it a health halo. It's like, oh, it's honey, it's healthy for us. Well, too much honey is still simple sugar. So, right? So you have to be careful with that. Okay? But just remember it's listed in order of weight. So put a lot of focus on those first 3 ingredients if you don't know, and take a look. So what I've given you guys is some tools. And again, you have this book because it has everything in it that I've been talking about. Take a look at it. But you have a bit of homework if you want to do it, to go in your kitchen and see what you already have in your kitchen. What's it made out of? What's the food label say? And then when you go to the grocery store next, take a look at those foods that you tend to buy most often and kind of put them under the microscope a little bit and go, maybe I need to look for another brand of crackers or another kind of, soup or something like that. So did you have a question?
Yeah, I'm looking for, is that the 3 most important
Yeah,
things on this,
yeah,
on this label?
yeah. Just look at the top 3 and remember what we talked about.
I mean like fiber.
Oh, you want to know which nutrients are.
3 things are most important.
Yeah, I mean, they're all kind of important. It kind of depends on who you are too, right? So if you're somebody who has low vitamin D levels, your doctor, vitamin D might be important to you. If you have low blood iron, iron might be important for you. But I think in general, the top ones to look out for, to avoid, are the saturated fat, the sodium, and the added sugars. So if you're going to look at 3 lines to determine if this is a healthy product for you, right? On the other hand, things that you want are fiber, right? Let's see, protein. Certainly if you're older, protein is a good thing to look at. Actually, it's good for anybody, but the older you get, the more so. Fiber, and then just, the nutrients are good too. Calcium, iron, potassium, vitamin D. Those might be a little bit more individual if you happen to need any of those. But fiber in particular, if I look at anything to determine if it might be good, the first thing I zero in on typically is fiber. Because that'll give me an idea if it has whole grain in it or not. Okay?
And you said saturated fat and what was the other 2?
So if you're trying to zero in on something to determine whether it's good or not, zero in on saturated fat, sodium, and added sugar. Thank you, goodness, added sugar, right? And cholesterol gets sort of an honorable mention there, right? Look at those 4 because those are the ones that you don't want a lot of, and then take a look at the fiber, right? Does it have fiber in it? We're talking about, the more fiber, the better. So if you're looking at, a product, find one that you like that maybe has, the most fiber in it that, that you will eat. That's important. Yeah.
Question with regard to added sugars, I think I was told that every 4 grams is equivalent to a teaspoon.
No. Well, let me see. Oh, hang on. I'm having a brain hiccup right now. It's teaspoons of sugar. Oh my gosh, I'm trying to. Maybe that is it. Is it? What did you say again? It was 4
grams.
4 grams per teaspoon. Actually, I think it's 5 grams per teaspoon because what you can do is yeah, you're right. Sorry, I was having a, you have like a brain spaz every once in a while. I think it's 5 grams per teaspoon because what you can do is you can look at how many grams are in, well, we typically do that as in the nutrition world, is we'll do like how many teaspoons are in a bottle of Coke, right? And then we'll measure that out for teaspoons and say, if you drink a bottle of Coke, this is what you're drinking. So yeah, sorry for the, the fried brain here. Yes.
You're right, because it says 5 grams of sugar.
Oh, okay, yeah, per teaspoon. Okay, I'm like, 4 didn't sound quite right, so, okay. So we were just, those of you who are online, we were just talking about 5 grams of sugar in a product is equivalent to 1 teaspoon. Does anybody online have any questions?
I teaspoon is a level teaspoon?
A level teaspoon, yes, that's what we're talking about. So, okay. It doesn't look like there's anything coming from online. Are you seeing anything, Sean?
Nope.
No? Okay. All right. Excellent. All right. Well, this has been our class for Food Smarts. I hope you all have enjoyed it. If you haven't already, I talked in the beginning a lot about looking at eatsmart.org. It's a really good recipe website. A lot of the recipes that I used can be found on that website. And I've given you guys a lot of different tips and things like that to think about as you go forward. What I suggest is if you're making changes in your diet and changes in what you're eating, don't try to change everything at once. That won't work. Zero in on one thing and make that work, because one thing that we know about healthy habits is that once you begin doing them and you begin feeling better, it's easier to develop more healthy habits. Okay? All right, everybody, it's been a lot of fun, and thank you for coming, and thank you for tuning in. 5 grams of sugar equals 1 teaspoon. Yeah. So if you measure 1 teaspoon, level teaspoon of sugar in your kitchen, that's going to be about 5 grams. Yeah. Okay. All right. Yeah, you're welcome. There's so much more information in these books that we did not go over. So I encourage you again to take a look at it. Now, has everybody, I don't think everybody filled one of these out. If you didn't fill these out,